This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the moment, whatever the sport, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here. You can get the podcast on all podcasting platforms and check out the YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. And Mosher is here today. Geoff Mosher, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Hey, Mike. I'm good. We've entered now the part of the off season. The Senior Bowl's over. We're going to start getting into some major free agency discussion. After that, it'll be draft. You know, the most common question we get, I'm sure you get this too, is, now that the season's over, what do you do? Are you bored? I'm like, no, it's actually busier than when the season's going on. There's a lot of information to hunt down.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right now you hit that little tiny bit of a lull, but like as you said, the Senior Bowl's done and you get all this stuff. But now, you know, when we get to that part of the offseason where all the transactional things and the offseason hirings and the firings all comes done, it seems that this is the time of the year where the stuff starts to leak, where what the problems were from the season before. I'm like, they hired this guy, Now everybody's in place, and this is now happening. And one of the things that we wanted to get into with you is what happened with Shawn Desai with the season there, as you guys were talking about on the Inside the Birds pod. You know, basically, it seemed that there was a disconnect between Shawn Desai and the defensive side of the ball. What more can you tell us about what happened there?
Yeah, and I know that this was discussed last week. You had Adam on, and we were down in Mobile and get a chance to catch up with a lot of people that you don't see during the season, a lot of agents, talked to a few who represented players on defense for the Eagles, specifically veterans. That was rookies and young players, it sort of doesn't matter. They try to run through the wall for anybody to prove themselves, but veterans are used to a certain way and have come to expect a certain standard. And what we got, the feedback that we were getting is that the veterans were just not on board with Shawn Desai, and communication was not a two-way street, felt like a one-way street. And they, as the season went on, the picture was painted of him as sort of being married to the way he was going to do it and sort of unbending with the players. And one specific veteran agent told me that, he couldn't stand what was going on there. And another one said that I heard that another veteran stopped talking to Shawn Desai. So it was a situation where you can understand why the organization felt it had to make a move. I think it goes back to then, if it had gotten to the point where maybe there was a mutiny on your hands, then what sense does it make to keep the man around if that's the kind of atmosphere that was created? Also, it goes back to your vetting process. How did you not, you had Denard Wilson in the building and, you decided to go with Shawn Desai. Did you do enough homework on him? You can't find out everything, but, maybe that there was not enough done in that regard. He's a smart guy. Everybody who I spoke to said that one of the things is he's a very smart education, master's degree, I believe he has in education. And sometimes smart guys can sell you on their intellect, but not on their leadership, right? That's something that you don't see until they're coaching and interacting with players. Why did they keep him? Probably because they were running his scheme and Matt Patricia didn't have a whole lot of familiarity with it, even though he was there all year. So you can see how that all just came together to make a really toxic situation.
Right. Very interesting stuff here because, Desai, okay, some would say, because we were talking about this Friday with Adam and it came up and then people were reacting and texting in and saying, well, and this is where the whole thing with Sirianni, like one of the text messages suggested like Sirianni basically took the player side. So does that tell the players that they can like have a mutiny anytime they want, that Sirianni's always going to go against his coaches? Or was it like, did Sirianni say, look, we're winning, I'm not going to do anything, and then the two losses came and then took his opportunity to kind of back the play? It's a weird situation, but, like, do we know how long this was kind of going on for?
There was communication breakdowns in the secondary especially, from game one, right? If you go look back at that Patriots game, and I'm not saying that this is when issues were raised, but just to give you an illustration, that looked like a good win for the Eagles. They went on the road. They beat the Patriots. You go back and look at that game. The Patriots had, I think, 2 touchdowns in that game, maybe 3. Or they had 350 yards. And, go look at how the Patriots did against every other team this year. They had games where they struggled to score a touchdown. And yet they were able to move the ball pretty well against the Eagles defense. So we saw it. I mean, we saw a lot of guys on the field, like guys lost in coverage. So I don't know exactly when the situation got to the point where veterans had to come and talk to Nick Sirianni. I do know that even before the play calling change, before the Seattle game, there were people on the team, veterans on the team, talking to the coaches. There's a leadership type council there and talking to the coaches about some of their concerns. But to your point, I don't want to sit here and say Shawn Desai bad, Eagles veterans good. I'm objectively looking at this. I'm just telling you how the veterans felt. Whether or not Shawn Desai is a bad guy or a bad leader based on them, or whether you think the veterans are just spoiled and, they weren't getting their way. That's for everybody else to decide. I'm just the deliverer of the news. I wasn't there. We all weren't there. The bottom line is it wasn't working. Also, we know that the defense in 2024 is going to look a lot different than the defense in 2023. It's reset for both.
I would interject, because you mentioned it seemed to be like the secondary. Some of those guys, Bradbury, Slay, Maddox, possibly Byard, depending on what they do with his contract. But they're all back. I mean, so there's a lot of guys. Well, I'm saying they're all at least contractually signed to be back.
Yeah, well, we all know that being contractually signed to be back and being back are 2 different things in the NFL world. So
100%.
No, some of them will be, Mike. To your point, it's not going to be 11 new players on defense. So that's completely obvious. But there's going to be a lot of new players, and there's going to be a new sheriff in town in Vic Fangio. And I don't think the Eagles are bringing in Vic here to sort of take play calling away from him by week 11 if the veterans don't like it. I think that they're bringing in a new sheriff. They're going to bring in some new blood and let the sheriff kind of, call the shots there, at least for this year, and see how it goes.
I guess the question on top of that would be then, is this demonstrating good leadership by Sirianni or questionable leadership by Sirianni in acting the way that he did?
Yeah, and, again, I like to be the guy who says these are good questions, and I don't have the answer to it. I think time will tell. I don't try to pretend that, I think as reporters, this is the most difficult thing, because sometimes we report things and people think that means we feel a certain way. A lot of people might have listened to the podcast last week and said, man, Geoff and Adam they're really painting Shawn Desai as the problem. No, I'm painting the picture of the players felt that Shawn Desai was an issue, and a lot of veterans had issues with it. And again, how that leadership on Nick Sirianni is reflected, we'll see. I don't know. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, it's impossible to tell. You can't really measure it. You can't quantify it, Moshe. I hear what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but how I look at it is, man, a disconnect. I feel like it takes a lot for players to be turning to each other saying, what the heck's this guy saying? What is he doing? What isn't he doing? Typically, players have their coaches' backs. Even if they don't know for sure, they're great at what they're doing. So I feel like it takes a lot to get there. And then back to what Gil said, I'm just going to repeat it, though. How does Nick Sirianni not spot that sooner? I just feel like he's just not even managing his staff. That's how I interpret it. That's aggressive. It's probably an unfair statement, but how do you assess it?
That does go back to the whole, this team was having communication problems, cohesion problems since day one. And what you want to know is, at what point did Nick Sirianni say, all right, this is now, the coaching isn't working? Coaches tend to, and Nick has said this, and he's not the only one, coaches double down on their process even when things go bad, because they don't want to believe that their process is bad, because it's what got them there. So I can understand if for the first 5 or 6 weeks, Nick Sirianni is looking at this saying, all right, we got young kids playing, we got a lot of injuries, we got a new coach, it's going to come together eventually, we just got to coach it better, we got to rep it better, we got to do it all better. But eventually that didn't happen, right? And so he did make a move. Now, could he have spotted it sooner? that's when you get to, we could all go back, but they were 10-1, right? So it's any coach that wants to make some drastic changes at 10-1 instead of saying, all right, we'll figure it out as we go along, is probably few and far between at that point. You know, you're not going to find too many guys who are. You'll find it in some occasions, just not in too many.
So knowing what we know now, you know, without us having a crystal ball, do you feel like Vic is the guy? You know, after you come out with this report, after everyone knowing what we all do, Moshe, you feel like Vic and his history of toughness is the right choice?
You know, the feedback on Vic Fangio is what makes reporting difficult at times because no one person knows all, right? So I spoke to people down in Mobile, and I was sort of surprised, as I think I haven't spoken to you guys since Wednesday, right? So maybe Adam talked to you guys about it, but we were a little surprised by the sort of reaction about the Eagles getting Vic Fangio from some people we spoke to. We thought people would be like, that's the home run that they wanted last year. So we didn't get that reaction. Drew Rosenhaus is very, you know, he had a clip where he says a lot of those Miami players were not upset to see him go. But then I know there have been stories written quoting other players who played for him in Denver who love him. So that's kind of where we're at here. And that's pretty much a lot of coaches. There's very few that everybody's going to love, right? There's very few Andy Reids where you have to like I think the only person ever who has ever told me he doesn't like Andy Reid is Freddie Mitchell. I think that's like literally the only guy who did not like playing for Andy Reid, and maybe he has his own reasons for that we all know. But it's very rare you're going to find a guy. Look at Shawn McDermott. Look how much criticism he came under this year for things that he did in the past or said or how tough he can be as a coach. And then the team went out and won 6 straight games and made it to the divisional round, right? So, look, Vic's record speaks for itself. He's pretty good at what he does. I have a feeling he's going to come in here and do a better job because, as some people have pointed out, you can't really do worse than what you saw last year from the Eagles defense. I also have the feeling, and I think we all do, that Howie Roseman's going to make it his mission this offseason to make sure that Vic's got some ingredients to work with on defense and doesn't leave him, with a bare cupboard. So that's going to work together, and I imagine you're going to see a better Eagles defense next year.
Real quick, Moshe, I know you got to jump off a little earlier today here on Football at 4, but did you get the sense at the Senior Bowl that people were surprised that Sirianni's still here?
Not at the Senior Bowl, I think, because by then it was pretty obvious he was, but listen, you'll talk to people who were even surprised that he was on the hot seat, right? And then you'll talk to people who know the organization, and they'd be like, wow, he survived it, didn't he? Good on Nick. So, the Eagles, their tendencies are well known throughout the league. So they are sort of a spectator sport at times, with everybody kind of wondering what they're going to do. But I don't think a whole lot of people are that surprised. I think more people would have been surprised if they just completely cut the cord on the guy after 3 years and 3 playoff appearances and a Super Bowl appearance.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, and of course, check out the podcast on all podcasting platforms. Look at their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. All right, Moshe, thanks, buddy.
Yep, you got it. You got the Andrew DeCecco mock draft, by the way, up on Inside the Birds on 1.0. It's must-read stuff.
I'm looking forward to it, man. You know I love a mock draft. I am.
That's right.
I think of all the people on this panel, I am the mock draft guy here. I love a mock draft.
You do. You do love the mock draft. You do not. You're not like some people who put their nose up in the air at the 11 million mock draft. You want them all.
I want them all. I want them all. I want them all. I'm going to miss you in Vegas this year, man. I was hoping you guys were going to come out there.
Yeah, well, I was hoping things would result that way too, but not in the cards this year. Sorry. Have fun, though.
All right, brother. See you.
See ya.